He wants to go down in history as the American president who has increased the size of the United States to a greater extent than any other president. And to do that, he is willing to smash the rules-based order.
Well, remember, way back, I think it was 96. It started off with, or 93. Putin started talking about little Russians. He called the Ukrainians little Russians. In two ways, he meant that as a very derogatory view of the Ukrainian people, but he also was trying to suggest that they're not Ukrainian. They don't have a separate identity. They are Russians, but should be controlled from Moscow. But given what's going on with the peace negotiations and all the rest of it, you're in touch with people on the ground inside Ukraine. What are they thinking of what Trump's doing?
Oh, absolutely appalling. There are none of my Ukrainian friends have any time for Donald Trump at all, because they're the ones that are at the hard end. They saw their president publicly humiliated and treated in a disgusting way in the White House. Was it last February?
Yeah.
And really, Trump sometimes seems to change his mind, sometimes seems to suggest that he has even said during last year that he thought that Ukraine could win and take all of their land back. But, to date, Donald Trump is yet to put one iota of pressure on Russia and Vladimir Putin. All the pressure he puts on is on Ukraine. And as I think you've said already, very, very recently, again, he has said that it is Ukraine that he sees as stalling these peace negotiations, when in fact the Ukrainians, as you've already said, Philip, have already made some huge concessions. There are one or two that they will not make. They will not concede the additional Donbass land, 25% of Donetsk. And to remind people, that's the fortress belt. That is heavily fortified. Putin has not been able to take that land, not in 4 years, is it nearly 12 years, because this war started back in 2014.
Yeah.
And it was Alexander Stubb, the president of Finland, who said before Christmas that belt is the gateway to Kyiv and indeed the rest of Ukraine. So this is existential. There is no way that Ukraine can give that up, and there is no way they can de facto recognize that Russia is occupying and freeze on the current lines of control, but there is no way that they can recognize that de jure.
Yeah, well, whilst everything else is going on, we've got the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov turning around today and saying that if Greenland is vital to the security of the United States, then Crimea is vital to the security of Russia, and is turning what is happening internationally with the pressure coming out of Donald Trump on Greenland, turning that into the way Russia's going. Now, I cheekily on social media put a little bit out saying, therefore, Kaliningrad is vital from a security perspective to Poland, and I haven't had a response from Foreign Minister Lavrov yet. But what do you think is going on with regard to Greenland, and how do you think Vladimir Putin will be taking that into his playbook?
Let me say two things. Let me first say what my mother drilled into me when I was a little boy: 2 wrongs don't make a right. So that's a completely spurious point that Sergei Lavrov has made, conflating Crimea with Greenland. But back to Greenland, I was on another station earlier on, and I was asked, what does Donald Trump want? Donald Trump can have unfettered access for his military to all of Greenland. The Americans used to have, under an agreement back in 1951, the Americans can have as much military presence. They had at one stage during the Cold War 17 military bases. They could reoccupy those bases, and they could build more tomorrow with the full cooperation of the Kingdom of Denmark, which is a NATO ally if they wished. I'm also reliably informed that if they wanted to drill for rare earth metals, which is becoming more practicable now that the earth is warming up, the Danes would be very, very happy to work with them, provided they were willing, that the Americans were willing to make the investment there. So really, I've thought long and hard about this. And what I said earlier on, I think I said before that Donald Trump is a narcissist. And I think what he wants to go down in history as the American president who has increased the size of the United States to a greater extent than any other president. And to do that, he is willing to smash the rules-based order into smithereens. That rules-based order that, although it's imperfect, has given the world the greatest period of peace and prosperity and security since the end of the Second World War, is currently on life support. And it's mainly on life support because of the actions of Donald Trump.
So yesterday on this channel, I was talking to General Philip Breedlove, who's a former SACEUR, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, and commander of US European Command, EUCOM. And they're double-hatted, NATO commander for the whole of NATO, and US National Commander for all troops in military capability based in Europe. And he turned around and said, because there's an international agreement in place between the Kingdom of Denmark and the United States, the 1951 Greenland Defence Treaty, then if Donald Trump gave US military officers an order to take Greenland militarily, it would be an illegal order and they could legally refuse it. And if they didn't, they could be prosecuted under current US domestic law. Donald Trump could nullify the international agreement himself by signing an executive order, but there's no signs that he's doing that, and he's not mentioning that. Do you think this is all bluff and bluster out of him?
I think it is, to an extent. I think Trump is behaving like a quintessential bully. And I think that means that what our leaders have to do is stand very, very strong, the sort of stance that Macron and Carney in Canada seem to be taking, slightly more diplomatic approach from our own Keir Starmer at the moment. But let's see how it goes. Look, I've said Donald Trump is a narcissist. He is, I would say, go as far as to say he is sociopathic. By that I mean he is devoid of empathy for other human beings. Unfortunately, that same man controls the greatest military force the world has ever known. The only thing that can ultimately stop Donald Trump is the American people, and the generals and other members of the military will have a very strong role to play in that. And there has been talk among a number of prominent former officers making it very clear that they took a pledge to the Constitution, not to Donald Trump. So it remains to be seen, but certainly I think, one hopes, I think that actually going into Greenland and using force to illegally annex it, as, say, Russia did with Crimea in 2014, would be a step too far. But it comes down to, will our Western leaders have sufficient steel in their spines, and will they have sufficient unity to make it very, very clear to Donald Trump what the stakes will be if he is to do that? I think, and it's my assessment only, and there's much bigger and more experienced heads than mine, but my assessment is that if we do that, if we stand united and strong, as they say, taco, Trump always chickens out.
Well, and Trump always chickens out, but we're having to deal with this at the moment. And you've been a comms professional into these sorts of levels of government and things beforehand. What advice would you be whispering into Keir Starmer's ear and Francois Macron's ear and Mark Carney's ear and Schulz's ear and anyone else that you could get from a comms perspective? A, trying to suggest what's going on, and B, how do you deal with it?
Look, for me, the most important thing is absolute unity of purpose, and our allies and our partners, the coalition of the willing, if you like, speaking with one voice. So you or I don't know. I certainly don't know what conversations are going on behind closed doors, to which hopefully Donald Trump and his people
And
are
do you think that's where
completely
most of the work
excluded.
is actually happening?
I would hope it is. I don't know. But certainly, I mean, you put the hypothetical question. If I was giving the advice, the first advice was we must speak with one voice. We must have absolute unity, and that voice must spell absolute resolve and strength. Because we've all been saying for many, many years that the Russians understand only strength. Putin understands only strength. The minister that I worked for in Ukraine a number of years ago said to me one day, we have a saying in Ukraine, Cormac, you get more with a kind word and a gun than a kind word alone. And, we could learn a lot from the Ukrainians. So yes, we need to be very clear about the message, but that message needs to be unified, because Trump, like Putin, will seek to divide and conquer, and that's already been made very, very clear, by the way, in some passages of the American National Security Strategy, which was published before Christmas, which made it very, very clear that Trump is no friend of Europe, and Europe is in Trump's sight. And he talks very openly, or the strategy talks very openly, of working with what they call patriotic parties. For that, read the far right, in countries who they would see as fellow travellers to the current White House MAGA regime, I will call it.